Hey, I'm Michael, and this is Michael in the Middle. It's an intergenerational relational podcast for people who are interested in better human interaction. I'm glad you're here. Hey, friends, Michael Johnson here with the very first Michael in the Middle podcast episode. I'm so glad you've joined us, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds in store for this podcast. And in fact, that's what this episode is going to talk about. To a certain extent, it's to set the table for what is to come. My producer, Rob Walls with Varnish Media, suggested perhaps that the first episode should feature the guy who's putting it together, and that would be me. Michael in the Middle is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and today I will be actually interviewed by a dear friend of mine, a guy that I've been in the middle of a lot of different things with across the last 4 decades, really. And so although I'll be conducting the interviews going forward, my good friend Greg Ruff is here today with me, and he'll be conducting the interview of yours truly. And I'm looking forward to what I have to say. And I'm looking forward to hanging out with Greg.
Yeah, we've done this a lot over different avenues. I mean, we've been on the radio together. We've done our own podcast, Purple Ties, and all that kind of stuff. But for more than 40 years now, we've been friends, and we've been in the middle of a lot of things. And I think this is an appropriate title. When I heard the title, I was like, yes, that is the perfect thing for Michael Johnson, Michael in the Middle. And I'm appreciative for all the things you've been in the middle of in my life, personally and professionally. Since 1981, my dad drove me up the hill to Trevecca, and it was shortly after that I met Michael Johnson. And for 33 of those years, we spent a lot of that time on the hill. You spent 33 of those years working at Trevecca. And I think one of the things that I've been on the front row watching you develop this. But I think one of the things that I want people to know is who is Michael Johnson beyond what they've seen in their different areas. Because I know in athletics, a lot of those people know you from there, and from Dean of Students, people know you from that, and now your role now. Talk about what you're doing now in the President's office there at Trevecca.
Well, I just very briefly did start at Trevecca as a student, Trevecca Nazarene University College back in that day. I came from Jackson, Mississippi, where I'd graduated high school. I was born and raised in Oklahoma. And then we moved right before my sophomore year to Jackson. And I've thought many times about how catalytic that move in 1975 was for everything else that's followed since, because I'm not sure I would have gone to Trevecca had we not moved to Mississippi at that time. But came in 1978, worked as a student admissions counselor, had an opportunity to play baseball at Trevecca, but I was given about 3 times the scholarship money to talk about Trevecca as I was to play baseball for Trevecca, and I think I made the right decision. Some days I still wonder, could I have hit, the curveball in college at least? But I've worked at Trevecca 2 different times in a professional role. 1985 to 1992, admissions and public information. We moved to Oklahoma for 5 years, 1992 to 97. May talk about some of the things that I did while we were there in Oklahoma. That was a great time for us. But in 1997, we moved back, and I joined Steve Harris and Rhonda Lilienthal and the team in student development. I was Assistant Dean of Students for Community Life for 12 years, and then in 2009, Dr. Dan Boone, our president at Trevecca, asked me to come over and work with him in a couple of different ways. And that's morphed into primarily alumni relationships, church relations. My current title is aide to the president for special projects, and then I still hold the dual title of engagement officer for church partnerships. So I spend a lot of time talking with people about Trevecca still, and it's a place that's very near and dear to my heart. But I also recognize that there are things about me that go beyond the role that I have at Trevecca, and I've been able to enjoy some opportunities there recently, and as I've been engaged in social media and other opportunities for engagement with people, I started thinking about and actually been encouraged by some people to maybe think about writing a book or doing a podcast or something like that. So here we are, Michael, in the middle. It's the first step in maybe trying to see what, in addition to Trevecca, I can offer to the world. And so, we'll see.
One of the things that I know, I was with you during your run as going through the doctoral program, and that really triggered a lot of thought with you, didn't it? And kind of triggered some of the thoughts heading towards this direction. What more can you do beyond just Trevecca?
Well, first of all, I would not be in a position to say much of anything to the world without the influence of people that I've had at Trevecca across the years. I mean, talking about professors and also talking about, the university's programs that I've been able to benefit from. I'm a kind of a music nut, and so I remember a song, "When Will I See You Again," by the 3 Degrees. And you could probably say that about professors at Trevecca. When will I see you again? Well, about every 20 years, it looks like I'm going to get a degree because I have 3 degrees from Trevecca. I was captivated by the dual themes of generosity and encouragement many years ago by one of my dear friends and a mentor, Dr. Stan Toller, recently deceased, actually in 2017. Stan passed after a bout with cancer, and I watched him. I worked with his brother Terry Toller, who remains a dear friend and confidant, and those guys were really foundational in my life in a lot of ways. Kind of pressing in on the idea of what it means to be generous at all times. I think I was born with a tendency toward a generous heart toward people, a pull for people, instead of root against them. But I watched Stan and was really captivated by the way he helped and encouraged people. And so my doctoral dissertation actually was a triangular study between generosity, satisfaction with life, and commitment to an organization. And it seemed to fit pretty well together with my life experiences, and particularly at Trevecca. But the whole theme of generosity really began to settle in on me in a whole new way as a part of that, academic study. Generosity is more than money. Generosity, the working definition that I liked the most and used kind of as a springboard for the study that I did, is that generosity is giving freely and abundantly to others. And I think that's just a mindset as much as it is anything. But as we all know, it's one thing to think something, it's another to go ahead and do it. And so I want to be in the middle of opportunities to encourage people to be generous and encouraging to one another and help each other make it through, So that's maybe in a nutshell how that program shaped some of what we're looking at today.
As we talked about earlier, I really love the name Michael in the Middle, and I feel like it really speaks to who you are. Also, what I know about you is how you've been affirming to a lot of people, sometimes even at their lowest point. You just have a knack for doing that. And so when I think about people, I wonder, what are the influences? How did they get to there? For you, it's easy because you can see your family, your immediate family, and also your in-laws, and you have great mentors right there ready for you. And so we know that. A lot of people, anybody that knows you knows that. But I want to know, and I think people would want to know, who are the other people outside your family who have had the greatest impact on your life, and maybe even as it relates to this project?
So influences beyond my family. First one that comes to mind was a teacher, my 4th grade teacher at Western Oaks Elementary in Oklahoma City. Just briefly, by background, I didn't start school with kindergarten. I started in 1st grade. I had no ramp up to what it was like to go to school just with a bunch of other kids. For the most part, during the first 5 years of my life, I was raised around adults. Had a weirdly advanced vocabulary for a guy that age, and I still get kidded about the words I use at work. And people say they keep their thesaurus handy, okay, what did he mean by that? But my 4th grade teacher's name was Gracie Bumpus. And she was the first person outside my family that I can truly say had a profound impact on my life in a way that I did not fully understand at the time, but I can look back on it now. She was somebody who encouraged me. She was the first big-time encourager that I had outside of my family or close church friends. And sadly, she passed away, at too young an age. But she was. I still think about Gracie a lot, and I stay in touch with her sons. Gracie Bumpus was amazing to me. She took time. She sought me out, found ways to give me opportunities to believe in myself. And that's why, I've been so proud of my wife's career, although she's retired now as a public school teacher. We can't do enough to elevate the significance of school teachers, particularly in those elementary ages when there's still so much formational work being done on the minds and hearts of kids. Another great influence on my life was my first youth pastor. My dad pastored two churches as I was growing up, from the time I was, about a year old till I was 15. We were in Elk City, Oklahoma for 4 years, and then in Oklahoma City for almost 10, 1965 to 75. And in the early 70s, my dad hired his first ever full-time staff person, and his name was Larry Ryan, a very successful insurance agent, but had a way of interrelating with teens and college students. And Larry and Gayla came on board there, and Larry did something for me that I paid attention to. He knew how to make kids feel like he knew them as an individual as opposed to just one of the group. And, I was a pastor's kid, a lot of eyes on me, as is the case. You hear anybody who grew up, the child of a pastor, that they felt like they had the eyes of the congregation always on them, looking for them to make a mistake. Larry never treated me like that. He just treated me like he knew that I was Michael, and that he invested in that relationship with me just like he did a lot of the other kids. And I'll always remember that. He took time to pay attention to me and to my unique issues, and so that had a profound impact on me. When we moved to Mississippi right before my 10th grade year in the summer of 1975, it was a difficult transition. Gone from a primarily Caucasian, white elementary and junior high school. We had about 1,500 students in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade there in Oklahoma City. And, of course, we had American Indian people there in Oklahoma that we knew. But there were only 3 black students in that student body of 1,500. And when we moved to Mississippi, I went to Jim Hill High School, which was just a couple blocks away from Jackson State University. Definitely, if you read about Jim Hill, he was an African-American leader in the early 1900s. The school was named in his honor, and it was a school for African-American students. And the only reason people with my skin color were there were because of the zoning laws at that time to desegregate schools. And, man, I met amazing people there. There's 2 people at Jim Hill that particularly stand out. The first of which is my baseball coach, Jerry Gibson. He was such a cool dude. He wasn't that much older than we were, I don't think. But he had a great wardrobe, and I don't know how he could afford it on a teacher's salary. We never asked, but he had a really cool Porsche 911 Carrera coupe, and he would pull in, and everybody just. He was Tom Selleck before. He was Thomas Magnum before Tom Selleck came along. He's a great guy, taught me a lot. The other person that made such an impact on me was Mary Meredith. She was my high school journalism and English teacher, and she was the wife of James Meredith, the first black student at Ole Miss. Wow. And I didn't know a lot about what racial tension really was until I got to Jim Hill and experienced it. Roots came on during my, sophomore year. I was exposed to something that I'd never really experienced in my life. And I found out what it was like to be the other, to be in the minority, and it was such a game changer for me. And so now when I hear about, people who think they're better than somebody else because of the color of their skin, or they think that someone else is less than because of the color of theirs, I'm not down with that. I still am not. And I think back to how Mary Meredith treated me with such kindness and dignity and grace, and allowed me to process things that I didn't really understand maybe, or hadn't ever experienced. And so she taught me so much about racial harmony, and we never talked about racial harmony. We just talked about being human. And in the process, I learned what it meant that we are all created in the image of God. And I can't leave that note without talking about Charles and Shirley Johnson over in Meridian, Mississippi, who pastored Fitkins Memorial Church of the Nazarene from 1961 until his death back in January here of this year. 61 years Charles was there. And, when people want to put a big overlay over the problems that we have in this world and blame it on this group or that group, to me, it's pretty hollow. It's because they haven't taken time to sit with people and hear their story. And honestly, that's another reason why I want to do this podcast, because I want to sit with people and I want to hear their stories. I want to hear what they've been in the middle of while they've been going through their lives. I know that I personally have been very fortunate. I've been given opportunities that maybe some other people have not. And I talk a lot. I know that. I mean, that's kind of, I majored in communication at Trevecca as an undergrad, partly because I thought communication was talking. And since I was, good at talking, okay, this should be a fairly easy program to get through. What I learned from Jim Quiggins was that communication was a whole lot more than talking. Mostly it was about being able to listen and understand. Because talking is not necessarily communication. Communication, if it's to be effective, guys like Bob Brower and Jim Neer and other teachers that I had helped me understand that unless there's understanding, true communication has not occurred. We're always communicating, but are we getting the message across? Are we being understood? Are we taking the time to understand? And so I remember one of the things in communication that still stands out to me is that it likened it to a quarterback throwing a ball to a receiver, the process of communication. The quarterback can throw the ball, but if the receiver doesn't catch it, it's incomplete, and there are forces in play in this world sometimes that intercept that ball. And I know that's rudimentary, it's very basic, but man, I just don't think we think about the communication process. And so if this podcast can somehow enhance that, that'd be pretty cool too.
I think one of the great things about podcasts is that they really are not defined, other than, as we talked about earlier, that the content is good. And it could be a 20-minute podcast or a 2-hour podcast, as long as what's being said is good. I love what you're sharing here. I have 25,000 questions now that I want. I don't think we can get those in this time. But I'm trying to figure out how to get all those things out that need to be said, that people need to hear about what you're doing with this podcast, like who you are, where you came from, what. But now I want you to talk about what are the seeds that planted that are now growing that have nudged you to do this podcast, and in there somehow try to start defining what you want to see out of this podcast.
Well, I guess it's a little arrogant of me to think that I could make a difference in some of the issues that we're dealing with in this world, and I think I should clarify that I don't know that I want Michael in the middle to be defined by how we deal with all the hot button issues that we're dealing with in terms of politics and all of that. Even in our own family, we have disagreements about political solutions. But I think if you really get down to the heart of the matter, how do we, in this current society with 24-hour news cycles available on cable news and in digital and print media and in especially with social media, how do we ever get to a point of mutual respect that allows us, even when we disagree, to truly care and love for one another? I think we've gotten to a point in society where we almost feel this pressure that if you don't believe exactly the way I do, maybe I shouldn't really spend too much time with you. I mean, I think, I don't know that we give voice to that truth that much, but I sure see that, you know. I hear people, say on social media, if you got people that are bugging you, just block them. Well, I think Diamond Rio's right. Love don't get nowhere walking away, I think you got to figure out a way. I guess when you talk about the seeds for it, I'm just naive enough. I'm just crazy enough. I believe in the power of God enough that maybe we can do better here. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I don't think just because people might tune into this, or maybe I'm likable enough or whatever, that suddenly everybody's just going to gather and sing a universal kumbaya. I'm not that dumb.
Well, I'm someone who believes in what you're saying. I do, and that's the reason I'm here. Not just because I'm your friend or because we spend a lot of time driving to backwoods colleges to broadcast games or whatever, but because I believe in what you're saying, and I believe that you can't make a difference if you're not sitting at the table, and you can't be in the middle if you're not sitting at the table. So you've got to get in there and do that. And I think in our society right now, we are built on, between politicians and media, which I've been in media for a great deal of my life. I've been there. They're looking for reaction, but not necessarily positive reaction, any reaction. It could be triggers and all that kind of stuff. And everybody's looking for clicks and all that. And what you're trying to do is something I believe in that we need more of, and that is to sit and talk with people that you may not agree with, or you don't know who they are, but you find out who they are, and maybe because you're in the middle of it, you learn something better about yourself.
There's a real sense in which being in the middle of something requires a whole lot more intention than just standing on one side or the other. I'm thinking that I want to say that this is not just about trying to find a middle way politically or theologically that offers a little bit of something for everybody. Although we're told the Apostle Paul said, "I've become all things to all people," so I might save some. I never really fully understood what that meant, and I'm almost sorry I brought it up, because somebody's going to probably tell me about it, when they get on. But yeah, I think the point is that if you don't live in the tension between some of these things that divide us, how do you ever hope to feel like you can connect to people at a point of maybe helping them through it? And so I don't have any grandiose ideas. I don't have any quantifiable data, that I'm looking for. But yeah, I'd like to see if there's, at least for a few people, a change of feel, a change of tone, a change of heart, perhaps. Maybe not on an issue, but a change of heart toward people who might feel differently about the issue. And that's not in any way, shape, or form saying that you shouldn't believe strongly as you do, particularly about things that are spiritual. But how do we reach out to people? You and I are Christian. We're regular church attenders. It's a huge part of our life. But we have friends who don't see spiritual things in the same way that we do, and we enjoy rich fellowship with them. And I want to be that kind of person. I want to be available to people, and I don't feel like I'm going to be dragged down into the pits of despair and doom by doing so. In fact, it's very invigorating sometimes to spend time with people just for the sake of being with another person.
We spent a lot of time driving to ball games to broadcast. You were always ready to go. And some of those were 2-hour trips, some of them were 6-hour trips, some of them lasted longer than they should have, but we always got there. And the reason why is we had a map. Before GPS, we actually looked at a map and maybe even wrote out directions, but we always knew before we left where we were going, what we had to do, and how we were going to get back. Tell people where this podcast is going. What is the vision that you have, and how are you going to get there?
At its heart, Michael in the Middle is not about political discussions. It's not about trying to find a way to establish a third party, although I think we probably need one. But no, Michael in the Middle is about being in the middle of relationships, standing in the gap, being bridge builders on a relational basis, but it's also about talking to people who are right in the middle of doing something about things that need our attention in these days, whether it's human traffic or community services or whatever the subject is. I know people, and I've got a list of people a mile long now that I want to talk to who are in the middle of making a difference in their communities and in their world. I don't think we can change the world, but I think we can change the world for somebody, and that's what I want Michael in the Middle to be about, and I think we got a shot.